Good evening. It's so wonderful to be here with you this evening, and I'm going to start off by having you to do something that will maybe just cause a little bit of adjustment in your seat. If you could look up into the wall where there are names engraved on the wall. Can people see that wherever you're sitting, which would be our south wall? Look up, look up. There are glass windows underneath, and there are names. Well, in 1917, when the original building of Central Library was created and constructed, there were 76 names that were placed on the perimeter of the building, inside and outside. 76 writers, authors, 1917. Of those 76, there were only 5 women, and there were no persons of color. In 2007, the names that you see on this wall in the back were added, which brings to a total number of 83 names. Of the 7 that were added, none are female, and none are persons of color. So, I grew up coming to the library and to Central. It was not my neighborhood branch, but was my favorite branch to go to. So, I know every inch of the library because I spent a lot of time in it. In 2007, almost at the place that I'm standing now, I was with the president of the Library Foundation, and I inquired about the names, the latest names that have been added to the wall. And I just asked the question. I said, do we know if any of the names that are engraved and enshrined are persons of color? And the answer was, I'm not sure. It's like, okay, could you find out? Didn't get back with me, but I continued to do my research. And I did some additional due diligence and learned that there were no persons of color that were listed. And fast forward, in 2019, I went to the Library Foundation and I took them on a tour of the building, the leadership, and I said, let's just take a look at the names that are in this space. What do you notice about them? How many are you familiar? How are you familiar with the names? And before I could get my sentence out about the omission, it became very clear to them that, yeah, looks like we're missing a lot of different folks. And I said, yes, some ones of a particular type for sure. And so I said, now is the time that we do something different. So I, along with the library staff and the leadership library board, we presented the idea that we wanted to be about correcting the narrative. We wanted to have a public place and a central library that is more representative, more inclusive, and recognizes and celebrates the diversity and the literary and the cultural and artistic development of our nation and our world, and that it be reflected in the library. And to that end, everything is in its own timing, and so I can't answer why it didn't happen in 1917. Got a good idea. But there was a real opportunity in 2007. But here we are today, not mourning the omission and the past, but celebrating today and looking for the future. For this is a project that is ongoing. We're looking to expand and to add a number of other names and making sure that they are engraved and visible to the library in Central and in other spaces as well. And in doing so, we reached out to many of you to give us suggestions and names and ideas of individuals, and you were very gracious in that regard. And so we had a good problem there, which we knew would happen. There are way more names than there are spaces. And so we're looking forward to finding, again, new places to have names and, again, to be more representative, more equitable, and more inclusive. And so just for a moment, I want to highlight, I'm not sure what's behind me right now, but I just want to, for those of you, if you get some time this evening, and even if you could, during a break or afterwards, please go to the Center for Black Literature and Culture, where the 10 individuals' names have been engraved, as well as their photos that represent them. And so the first is Phyllis Wheatley, who was enslaved as a child and became the first African-American author of a published book of poetry, followed by Frederick Douglass, an orator, freedom seeker, and became leader of the abolitionist movement, a writer, and also a statesman. W.E.B. Du Bois, an intellectual, scholar, Fiskite, and the first African-American to receive a PhD from Harvard University, a racial justice advocate, and co-founder of the NAACP. Paul Laurence Dunbar, acclaimed poet, novelist, and writer, and also very much known for his dialectic verse and poetry. ZORA Neale Hurston, acclaimed poet, novelist, and writer known for dialectic verse and poetry, and examined the folklore and the American South. Langston Hughes, novelist, playwright, early innovator of jazz poetry, and leader of the Harlem Renaissance. Richard Wright, influential novelist, poet, and nonfiction writer on topics of race and poverty. James Baldwin, racial justice activist, orator, and acclaimed writer of essays, novels, poetry, and plays. Maya Angelou, trailblazing and best-selling poet, novelist, educator, playwright, and civil rights activist. And our beloved Toni Morrison, Nobel Prize-winning novelist whose works examine the Black experience and effects of racism. The beauty and the common thread of these 10, and looking at, starting with Phyllis Wheatley from West Africa, coming from the cradle of our civilization, where the mastery of the arts, the sciences, philosophy, literature was in the DNA and is a part of the African diaspora. And so we have an obligation to keep telling the story and to correct the narrative of the many, many omissions and oversights when we don't tell the whole story. And the library, a pillar of liberty and of liberation through education and through literacy, has a primary role to be able to bring truth to power.